Our third speaker, Dr. Jeffrey Michael, is director of the Center for Business and Policy Research at University of the Pacific. He earned his BA at Hamilton College in New York and a PhD at North Carolina State University. Before coming to Pacific in 2008, he spent 9 years as faculty member, associate dean, and director of the Center for Applied Business and Economic Research at Towson University in Maryland. His areas of expertise include regional economic forecasting and environmental economics, among other things. He is published in scholarly journals and is cited over 100 times a year, at least, in the local and national press. You've probably heard a report on NPR or read it in the Record or in the local newspaper. But sources as far away as the Wall Street Journal, New York Times, LA Times, San Francisco Chronicle, etc. Tonight he will be discussing the economic impact of automation arising from the development of artificial intelligence and robotics. Our speaker, Jeff Michael.
Thanks. Yeah, I'm feeling a little more optimistic too. I realize that there's a lot of jobs that are going to still exist, getting these robots to do what we want to do before they can put us all out of work. I don't know if, is this microphone sufficient here? Okay. So I don't have a PowerPoint presentation because I'm going to start with a quote from a presidential speech where I want you to guess the president. If I showed it to you, it would, give away the quiz. So here's a president speaking to Congress after a few sentences about technology in business and the economy. He says, "I'm therefore transmitting to Congress a new manpower and training development program to train or retrain hundreds of thousands of workers in areas where we've seen chronic unemployment as a result of technological factors and skills made obsolete by automation." What president do you think that is? In what year? Trump 2018? 72, 73? Yeah, so almost. That was President Kennedy in 1961 speaking to Congress. Shortly thereafter, they created the National Commission on Technology, Automation, and Economic Progress. It released a report under the Lyndon Johnson administration. And the report about technology and automation was basically, it was about anxiety of what technology would do to jobs. And amongst its recommendations were, quote, a program of public service employment providing that government be the employer of last resort. This is 1964. And also, quote, economic security be guaranteed by a floor under family income, end quote. In other words, a call for universal basic income, which is something that we're hearing now in the policy debate, and something that has come home in a very important way to Stockton, which is now in national headlines. I just returned from Washington, D.C., where I was this week, and people are like, oh, you're from Stockton. What do you think of universal basic income? What about that mayor that you have? There's been hundreds of articles about this, and it's important, it's interesting, this idea of universal basic income and the grants and foundations are actually, my understanding is they're mostly funded by wealthy technologists that are concerned about the changes that technology could have in the world and the potential and some of the social impacts. So there's a few lessons from this 1961 anecdote. First, the concerns, they're not new. Jim showed a slide showing the agricultural revolution and the industrial revolution. There have been fearful predictions of mass unemployment and poverty caused by machines for centuries. The Luddites over 200 years ago were destroying textile looms in England. We've had concerns for the Industrial Revolution. I just gave you a quote from 1960s America, and we certainly see it today in reports and magazine covers in the press. If you ever take a course in economic principles, in the first week, the first thing they'll teach you in an introductory economics course is the production possibility frontier. And one of the very first lessons we try to teach is how expanding technology and productivity in one sector say agriculture or manufacturing, actually expands production technologies in all sectors of the economy. And the way it does it is basically by freeing up resources to go and make them available in other uses, so that if we have an agricultural revolution, that frees our labor from producing food and allows us to do all sorts of other things, from developing robots to medicines. And so, that's one of the basic lessons from Economics 101. Nevertheless, there's a lot of anxiety about automation and robots, and this time is different. They can think. The technology is getting more advanced. As I mentioned, I just returned from Washington, D.C., where I was at a meeting of the National Association of Business Economists. And as a business economist, I guess it's my job to relay some of the thoughts from that meeting, because actually the very last plenary panel for the meeting was on this very topic, which was very convenient for me because I could sit in there and grab a few quotes for the discussion today. And they were discussing, this thinking coming from Silicon Valley, and amongst the quotes are, quote, extraordinarily bad work coming from technologists in Silicon Valley who are writing books about mass unemployment as a result of their inventions. And, quote, there's an epidemic of false alarmism. And, these business economists from across the political spectrum weren't too worried about this. In fact, we tend to see technology as a solution to some of the problems that we do stay up worrying about at night about the economy. And so I'll mention two things that have very little to do with artificial intelligence and automation, but are what we are worrying about when we think about the economy and project forecasts. One of the first ones is demographics. So what economists stay up worried about at night is that the aging of the population, the decline of the birth rate, and the ratio of working age adults to the total population is in decline. How are we going to manage our society and our economy in the face of those demographics? The second thing we're concerned about is actually there's been a slowdown in worker productivity or output per worker in the past couple of decades. It's not advancing at the pace that it was in the past. And so from a macro perspective as an economist, you look at these new technologies or robotics and artificial intelligence, and you see these as solutions that can help us to continue to grow and overcome some of these challenges that we face in this society. That's not to say there aren't some economic challenges. Most notably, there's potential impacts for economic inequality. We know here in California that there's people making a fortune off of developing technology. And we're concerned about the displacement of workers from robots. So what jobs are the jobs that are most likely to be automated? And people studying this say the question is better rephrased in terms of what tasks, not necessarily what occupations. I've seen estimates that about 50% of the tasks that people do in their daily work could be automated with technology that we have today or are on the cusp of developing today. But that doesn't mean that 50% of jobs could be automated. In fact, the number of jobs that could be fully automated with current technology is probably less than 10%. But that's still a lot of people. What jobs are the most potentially impacted? What's most automatable? I mean, things that involve repetitive behavior, right? A robot, or I should say a machine, or whatever it was, could struggle pouring your breakfast cereal. And the most impacted jobs have these automatable tasks. So fast food, back office administrative jobs, things managing and storing data. We've actually seen huge automation in the financial industry in the past couple of years, and we've seen job decline in the financial industry. Factory jobs, retail jobs, and eventually driving jobs. The majority of these substitutable jobs are lower paid, and that's what creates a social angst about the economy. Most of the jobs for which technology is a complement tend to be higher paid and higher skilled, although not necessarily all of them. So that raises that issue of inequality, and it was the second point of Kennedy's speech and Lyndon Johnson's Commission on Technology. So it didn't completely mention that just to sort of, haha, make fun of them from the 1960s. We don't need to be worried today. It's actually, I think, to some extent, no coincidence that the 60s were a time actual great anxiety about technological innovation, and that's the time in which the United States launched the Great Society and a major expansion of social programs in the United States. Historically, these advances in technology can create concern about inequality. And in fact, that speech that I quoted Kennedy from is most famous for when he declared that we were going to put a man on the moon. It's most famous as a speech in which we were embracing and pursuing technological advancement at the same time as it was expressing concerns about some of its social impacts. So what do we need to do as an economist, and I look to this in the future, and how are we going to address some of these issues? One thing I point out is that we need a labor market that's flexible. It's true that there's going to be displacement, there's going to be change, and people are going to have to be continuously updating their skills and finding new things to do. So we want to watch out for policies that add frictions to the labor market at a time when we need it to be nimble and responsive. So personally, while I'm concerned about inequality, I'm actually also very concerned about California's very rapid and very rigid approach to advancing the minimum wage to $15 an hour, simultaneous with a time when a lot of new automation. An alternative example of social policy that helps equity, that makes labor markets more flexible, is to separate health insurance from employment. So something like a single-payer healthcare system would be an example of a smart policy that makes labor markets more nimble and would support people and support this. I bet you didn't expect someone to advocate for single-payer healthcare at the automated AI seminar. So anyway, finally, let me just leave you with a little bit of recent research of the findings of one of the industries at the forefront of automation technology, specifically e-commerce and Amazon. So Amazon opens up these fulfillment centers, they bring the reporters in, and people see the Kiva Systems robots running around. And anytime they do that, my phone rings a lot that day, as the reporters have my number. And they call me up and say, "Oh my God, Jeff, I saw these robots. What are people going to do? How are they going to support themselves?" And I get this call a lot. And so this is a research question that people are looking at now. I don't think there's a complete answer to it. The question, does an Amazon fulfillment center full of robots destroy more jobs than it creates? Somewhat surprisingly, the data and research thus far says no. Retail employment is flat or slightly declining in some areas. That's true. But it appears that the biggest activity that Amazon and e-commerce is substituting for isn't people working retail jobs in stores, but it's unpaid household time spent shopping and running errands around town, driving their car. And that the biggest thing that Amazon has created is a new product that sells convenience, and it sells time to me, and it reduces my unpaid effort made searching for goods. So there are some losers, and there are some retail jobs that are getting repossessed. But some of the study so far show that Amazon fulfillment centers, the biggest losers are those who own shopping centers, the owners of commercial real estate and capital, not crying too much for the poverty of them. And in fact, repurposing, those malls and parking lots is another great opportunity for us to create jobs and create values to solve another social problem. So I'm optimistic about these developments in the human condition and their effect on business and the economy. Thank you.